what are we most underprepared for?
Oh,
So there are obviously all these changes happening, and it used to be, over the next year, it's going to be crazy. It's the next week we live in a different world, and business models are being disrupted.
yeah. I don't know if everyone's really internalized how much better these models are going to get in
Yeah.
the next couple of years. I think it'll be an equally big jump a couple of years forward. And so far, they've been good at summarizing information and answering questions. We're on the cusp of reasoning. Once they can plan it, they can execute. They can just log into a website like a human does and book that air ticket or whatever it is. And so we're going to see these kind of lots of different agents, what people call agents today, arise that actually execute tasks. It's not software moves from helping humans be more productive to doing the thing for the human. And that's a giant leap.
Please welcome to the stage JD Weinstein, head of VC practice at Oracle, and Aaref Hilaly, partner at Bain Capital Ventures.
Welcome to AI Unleashed, powering the future of cutting-edge infrastructure. My name is JD Weinstein. I lead the global venture practice for Oracle, where we help startups scale with our enterprise connections, our global customer network, and our cloud solutions. And particularly, interestingly enough, we've been investing quite a bit in the compute build-out to power this next AI revolution, and working with you all to bring interesting, unique AI capabilities to market. So with that, I'm joined by Aaref Hilaly, partner at Bain Capital Ventures, who has invested in and around this space for quite some time. And I can guarantee you will learn something fascinating almost every time you talk to Aaref here.
Wow.
So, Aaref.
I don't know about that, but wonderful to see you guys. I started out as an entrepreneur building a SaaS company, which I did for 6 years. And so I've been to SaaSta many times as an entrepreneur before. And it's great to be back now as an investor.
Great. I think the first question is really maybe for those of us running SaaS companies, why do we care about AI infrastructure?
Yeah, at a certain level, you don't need to care about infrastructure in the sense that it gets taken care of by other folks like Oracle. But in another sense, you really do, because AI is going to be a major component of your product. It's going to be how you compete, how you differentiate going forward, and how you manage the components of infrastructure and how you work with them is going to have a big impact on your product experience. And so while I feel as an app entrepreneur, you don't need a super detailed technical understanding. You do need to understand like the core components, how they work together, and how to think about including them in your product.
Yeah, we certainly want to dive a bit deeper in that. So I'd love if we could just start by maybe you could just define AI infrastructure and maybe the building blocks that go into it. How do we think about this maybe behind the scenes?
Yeah, sure. So under the covers, infrastructure is everything that is behind, let's say, a ChatGPT-like experience, which starts with the silicon chips or GPUs, typically from NVIDIA. Then there's the chips, the data centers. Obviously, there's a massive build-out going on right now. Then there are the models, which you'll have heard about GPT-4 or Claude from Anthropic or what have you. And then there's infrastructure around the models, doing things like helping you pick the right model, so model evaluation, or managing data to be fed into models, which would be data curation for LLMs. So that's infrastructure around models. And then finally, just developer tools to build on top of the model.
Okay. So that's helpful. And then maybe further on with categories that we're seeing emerge within AI infrastructure?
The categories that we're seeing, things have actually evolved really well for people at the application layer, which is why as an investor, and I'm not alone in this, I'd say many investors now are super interested in AI-powered applications. And it's because of how things have played out for infrastructure. So the key things that have happened, number one, there's not just one model. There are multiple models, which means that you have a choice and you can shop between them. The models themselves, companies such as OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, have the resources to invest billions in training these models. So you have more and more powerful engines under the hood that you can use think of them as intelligence generators, are getting more and more powerful at no cost to you because you're not paying for the training. What you do pay for is what's called inference, which is every time you use the model, it's not free. You're using a GPU, there's electricity, there are actually hard dollar costs. And so companies pay usually per million tokens for every time they use it. And those prices for inference have massively plummeted this year. I mean, it started the year at, I'm not sure, like $40, $50 a million tokens. Now it's down to a couple of bucks. And what that means is you have more powerful models, more abundant intelligence, if you like, to build into your application that costs less every time you use it, which opens the door to you using it much more in your application to do things that previously apps just couldn't do.
Yeah. And it wasn't 2 years ago, I'd say, when this craze started, a major topic was access to GPUs.
Yeah.
To be able to even train these models and to be able to inference them. As you suggested, it used to be that we had, of the market, give or take, 80% of the market was training models with 20% of them inferencing and people interacting with those models. And now it seems like it's just about flipped. And so a lot of that compute is going towards inference, which, as Aaref mentioned, the costs have dramatically come down. All of a sudden, it's democratized, right?
Yeah.
Like where a few players were really playing very big, now everybody has an opportunity to infuse AI in their business and use it in these interesting ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't obvious it would work out that way. If OpenAI were the only game in town, they could charge you a lot for using their model. But they're not. You also have Llama and Anthropic and a bunch of other things, and that makes it much more competitive, which means value moves up to the application layer potentially, which is where many folks at SaaS are playing. So it's played out really well for people at the application level.
Now, that being said, it's still a massive market, this market of compute and this idea of access compute. So maybe you can just share a little bit about the compute build out, and are we seeing the productivity gains that are necessary to continue fueling this compute build out? In other words, is the juice really worth the squeeze?
Yeah, I'll comment briefly on where we are in the cycle, and then I'd love your perspective on the build out, because Oracle is actually building a lot of this stuff out for you.
Some of it.
Your firsthand experience of this. We are at the very early stages of this kind of AI platform shift or cycle. If you look at previous things, like when the internet came along, typically the infrastructure build out precedes applications and all the stuff that comes on top of it. So, if folks are old enough here, you think back to the late 1990s, it was Cisco selling routers and switches that was the hot company because they were selling like hotcakes as the whole internet backbone was getting built out. But it wasn't until years later that Workday and Salesforce and Coupa and a whole generation of SaaS companies came along to build on top of that infrastructure. So there was a period of a few years where this was being built out. Remember, in 2000, there were 50 million people on the internet. So people were spending billions at that point in the late 90s for 50 million people using this thing and people that people weren't sure about. And so we're at a similar stage for that now, where there is this massive level of expenditure on everything from data centers to training models to all this stuff. We have not yet seen anywhere near what we will on the application level of people leveraging that. And I think the reason for that is that it just takes time to digest these things and figure out how to use them. Again, looking at history, if you look at mobile, the iPhone came out in 2007. We didn't get the first really mobile native apps like Uber and Snapchat until 2009, 2010. So there's this kind of 2-3 year period. So I feel like we're in that 2-3 year air pocket right now where the infrastructure is here and is coming and we can see what's going on, but it hasn't yet been fully digested, which in some ways is a good thing because this infrastructure build out is not trivial. It's really quite substantial. It would be great to hear just your firsthand experience of this at Oracle.
Sure. And I think that's right. It's still, people are building quite novel, interesting applications, or they're still playing around with this technology and getting used to it. Obviously, we have loads and loads of companies that are taking advantage and trying to add value at different places in the stack. Maybe I could take a step back and give you a firsthand picture into how meaningful this compute build out is and what that means. We had quite enough data centers to power a lot of the CPU and compute needs. And all of a sudden, the major friction point, even a couple of years ago, was these chipsets in the supply chain. So I'm sure everyone has heard and was familiar with that. In fact, today, it's really just, do we actually have enough raw physical power to do this? We have way more demand than we have power. And so we've bet big in investing heavily in the space. We've got 66 regions around the world. And in fact, there are other sovereigns that want to build out their own AI infrastructure data centers because they want to control proprietary data and how LLMs operate, other kinds of things. Just to give you the general rule of thumb, these AI infrastructure data centers, about 200, 300 megawatts. 1 megawatt powers about 1,000 homes. And a good-ish rule of thumb is it's about $3 million to build out each megawatt. So you can do the math on how serious that is. We'll be scaling up now to gigawatt data centers. Our founder of the company I work with, Oracle, Larry, just announced publicly yesterday to a group of us that we're actually working in Europe, where we have secured some permits to use 3 small nuclear reactors to power a gigawatt data center across the pond. And in order to take advantage of all the greatness and the AI capabilities that we're talking about that can be possible from inference, we still need to power all of this. So hopefully that gives you a broader level of picture. And the other thing is, what a time to be alive. If you had told me that 5 years ago, I would say you are freaking out of your mind. But here we are today. So maybe we can discuss, are there other major areas of AI infrastructure? We talked about training versus inference, maybe just the competitiveness in the market, perhaps code generation, other things that may come up.
Yeah. Every area is super competitive, which is great if you're a customer. Codegen, I guess, is one example. Codegen's a perfect kind of use case for these models. And the models are improving really quickly on this. The new OpenAI model, Strawberry, which will be released soon, I think, is another significant step forward. What we see in Codegen is just like and this will repeat across different areas. You just have a handful of really great teams going after it, taking different approaches. So some are taking a kind of like vertically integrated approach of creating their own model. And we've partnered with a company, Poolside, started by Jason Werner, who was the CTO at GitHub that created GitHub Copilot. And that's their approach, where they're creating a model specifically around Codegen. And then there are other people who are operating at a higher level of the stack, where they say, no, we'll just ride the rails of OpenAI and others and build a compelling developer experience on top of it. And Cursor might be one example of that. I would expect this to repeat across different spaces. And I think it's great from an innovation perspective.
Right. By the way, I'm going to take a quick pause. We'll go through a couple other question sets here to dive a bit deeper in how it's relevant to you all building SaaS companies. But we will have some time at the end to answer questions. So be sure to maybe think through what we're not covering. Aaref, can you talk about, so we have mostly a group of SaaS companies. We are at the conference SaaStr. We already asked the provocative question of like why you should care. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what are efficient technical ways to build AI into the businesses that all of us are building today?
Well, I think the natural inclination would be to tack AI onto your existing product. And if you look at a product, a lot of people use Notion. Notion will now have a copilot or an assistant where it'll help you draft and write things. And I think everyone will pretty much look to do that. And to some extent, that's useful because it means you don't need to use a manual to learn how to use new products. Some of the work it can do for you. That's all fine. I think the more interesting thing is to think about, given your domain expertise in the area you're working in, what would an AI native experience look like? So if you were starting with a blank sheet of paper, just how could you design a product? And I think AI products ultimately will end up looking and feeling radically different from the products we have today. Just the whole concept of a menu system and clicking through things potentially makes no sense for an AI-powered application, because it should have the kind of intelligence to know what it is you're trying to do and just help you just jump straight into that, sparing you having to click 5 times to find the thing. So I think there's like the baseline minimum today of adding a co-pilot or assistant to your existing product, but really it's about thinking about what are these new experiences you can create using AI.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. We also think about maybe the business model too. Like, do we just put this into our products and continue to charge the same amount? Do we add new SKUs? Have you thought about that with the businesses that you work with?
It's tough. You can't just add it in because there's a real dollar cost. You have to pay for inference. You got to pay for the underlying model. And so that makes it, and then per seat pricing often doesn't make sense in the context of something that replaces a seat, if that's what you're trying to do. And so I think you have to charge it as I would say that on the one hand, you don't need to worry too much about pricing right now because all these prices are coming down and you can always change it later. It's more about finding something that people really want. But on the other hand, you also can't just give something away that's going to crush all your margins completely. So some kind of separate charge, I think, for AI products that require inference, I think people understand is needed for sure. But ultimately, pricing will move away from per seat, which I know has been the core of SaaS, just because in an AI context, it makes no sense.
I'm curious your viewpoint on there's sometimes fear mongering about everything AI that's coming to market, but I'll take this not super extreme, but maybe just into a business, which is, hey, we can do a lot more with less. So we don't need as many people. We don't need as many resources. We need 50% of people, the amount of staff that we had to do similar things if we infuse AI in. I think as technologists, and we know if you give that to any entrepreneur, she is going to say, oh, great, let's ramp that up and go do 2, 4, 10 times as much output. I'm curious just your reaction to that and maybe how you coach entrepreneurs.
Yeah, generally I coach entrepreneurs to just focus. It's hard to think of everything all at once at the same time and balance 15 different considerations. I just feel like just build something people want. Just find something that resonates with people, and then figure everything else out from there.
Yeah. Great. So lastly, I'd also love to hear, what are we most underprepared for? So there are obviously all these changes happening, and it used to be, over the next year, it's going to be crazy. It's the next week we live in a different world and business models are being disrupted.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone's really internalized how much better these models are going to get in the next couple of years. And that's partly because it's just hard. It is a hard thing to wrap your head around. I mean, if you think of what they are now relative to where they were, say, 5 years ago, and that gap, so they were nowhere 5 years ago, and now they're really good. I think it'll be an equally big jump a couple of years forward. And so far, they've been good at summarizing information and answering questions. We're on the cusp of reasoning. Reasoning's been difficult, but we've made real progress towards that. And in the next couple of years, I think they'll be able to make plans and break down tasks and do much more complex things. All you need to do is then give them a web browser, and now they can actually do stuff and execute tasks. Once they can plan it, they can execute, because they could just log into a website like a human does and book that air ticket or whatever it is. And so we're going to see these kind of lots of different agents, what people call agents today, arise that actually execute tasks. It's not, software moves from helping humans be more productive to doing the thing for the human. And that's a giant leap. And that'll happen using the big models we see today, but they're going to be these little models running locally on your devices that operate at the edge as well and perform lots of little tasks really efficiently. And so, I don't know, it's just a hard thing to wrap your head around, but I think a couple of years from now, it's going to feel very different. Humans will be, we're going to progressively move up and operate at this high level of abstraction. And there's going to be much less of the kind of boring stuff. If you think anytime, one thing I think myself is, how many times have I sat on hold? How many times have I spent ages filling out these mindless forms, or been asked to sign something that there's no way I'm going to read because it's a whole bunch of legalese, who the heck knows what it is? All that stuff goes away.
Yeah, a lot of the mundane personal tasks. And you think about how much time we've really spent as humans on these things. It adds up quite a bit.
Sure.
Great. I want to make sure that we have some time to hear from you all. And so are there any questions in the crowd on anything AI infra? Yeah. Question about commoditizing LLMs. And maybe we can even add in that this sort of war that's been brewing against open source versus closed source.
Yeah, sure. So
as well.
Sure. We thought at one point it could be a one model world, which is OpenAI is dominant. And I'd say the big development in the last years, that's clearly not the case. That Anthropic has kept up. Obviously, you've got Google, and then you have these open source models. And open source has been a total game changer. Who knew that Zuck would spend billions creating a model and then throwing it out there for everyone to use for free? It's hard to predict that, really. But it does. These are the Llama models, and most recently what's called Llama 405, which is 405 billion parameters, which is a really powerful model that you could use for many things. Now, using an open source model is complicated, but then there are third-party providers who take that and make it easy for startups to use. So models have gone from being this kind of single premium thing that only one person has to being a bit more like the airline business, I think. You're not going to have 100 airlines because it's high fixed cost to run an airline, just like it's high fixed cost to train a model. But you're also not going to have one airline. You're going to have 5 or 6, and they'll compete in airlines, obviously, on price and schedule and locations that they fly between. And the models will compete, I think, over time by being good at probably slightly different things. And so then what will happen for entrepreneurs is they're going to be able to optimize across those different models. And so there'll be this layer of infrastructure. Model evaluation is what it's called today, where you get to test the models for different things you're trying to do and pick the right one, make the right set of trade-offs for what it is you're trying to achieve.
Is there a notion that when you're behind, you're more up to open source things, and then when you become ahead in the game, you tend to close source things?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because the implication is that Facebook will open source for a while they're behind, and then once they get ahead, then they'll close source. And so if you have built your entire future based on Facebook's open source models, at that point, you could be in trouble. There is that risk. And so I think the way that most founders and people mitigate that or try to deal with that is just not to be locked into a single model, to use open source models, but to also use other models as well so that you can move between them.
That's a great question. Anything else? Yeah. How do you build trust with AI, both, I think, for blue collar jobs or folks maybe that anybody that wouldn't find themselves in this room today at a forward-thinking technology conference?
First of all, it's ironic in some ways that it's the what have been called white-collar jobs are the more under threat from AI than the blue-collar jobs. So historically, the blue-collar has suffered from technology a little bit, along with globalization, but here, it's the white-collar jobs. Building trust in AI, I think it's just going to be one of these invisible things that people just naturally get used to. It's like the difference between what people say and what they do. People say they care about privacy, and the privacy is super important to them. But people, what they do is they give up their privacy completely for convenience. And they're super happy sharing their location and all their personal data to connect with their friends and other things they want to do. So I feel it's like one of these things where people say one thing, but really feel another. And so there is this nagging concern of an AI overlord and we all work for an algorithm kind of thing. But then in reality, anytime anyone goes anywhere, they immediately use Google Maps and the algorithm tells them how to get there, even if they know the way to that place. And so I think AI will just embed itself invisibly in society, and people will enjoy the benefits and just come to rely on it without even realizing. Just repeat.
I think just comment on after the fact, we learn things that come into play about who really owns our data and what they're doing with it. But of course, to Aaref's point, I think it is a little crazy, right? When we have every type of smart device listening to us and thinking about our homes in every room and with us at all times. I think it'll be quite similar to the age and era of the internet, where people had a lot of the same fears. And over time, pretty quickly, when you see the improvement of life, which is, I think, the answer to this question, if you can really, truly improve lives, people will probably soften up.
Yeah, I don't know there's a good solution. You're right that often people don't realize the data they're giving up. But what's the solution? In Europe, they have a thing where every time you go to a website, you have to give cookie permissions, because in Europe, make exactly this point. People don't know what they're giving up. We will educate them by annoying them every time they go to a website and presenting a huge page of small print and asking them to make 5 decisions before they can look at that web page. And my guess is that most people in Europe just click whatever. Yeah, fine. Have your cookies. I don't care. Just show me the information I want. And it leads to a worse consumer experience. So there's not an easy answer. I just think that people don't care enough to get upset about it. And so we'll
check the box.
Yeah.
Thoughts on infrastructure around various industries, whether it be healthcare, consumer, etc.
Yeah, different industries are going to have different needs. And certainly entrepreneurs could use that to capitalize. So generally I think the main distinctions are size of business, small, medium, large, and then regulated, non-regulated. And small businesses are their own thing. They're just like consumers. Medium-sized businesses are where a lot of companies start because they're sophisticated. They have a budget. You can start there and move up. Large companies require a whole bunch of infrastructure around what they're doing. And you have to go through security review and integrate with systems and all the rest of it. And then if you're regulated, you can times that by 3, where they want it on premise and they have to live by a whole bunch of regulations. So
right.
I would just say this is very hard to serve all of those segments together. And if you're going after specific verticals like healthcare or finance or government procurement, you have to really take care of their specific requirements.
Yeah, I think that's right. In our business, like I think a lot of the greatest unlocks will be in the world of healthcare and everything to come. But to start out, there are so many regulatory hurdles to get into a place to deliver that value. And so we can start with things like in our human capital management system, where we're helping you generate better performance reviews or job descriptions. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out. Thank you so much. Thank you, Aaref, for joining me on stage. Hope you all enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your SaaSter.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.